The scream cut through the howling wind like a knife. "Help! My children! Please! Somebody help us!" Gideon Cole's head snapped up from the firewood he was splitting. That was a woman's voice, and it was close, maybe half a mile up the mountain pass. Nobody should be up here. Not in this storm. Not in this God-forsaken wilderness where Gideon had built his life away from the world below. His dog, Storm, a massive gray beast that was more wolf than anything else, was already at the cabin door, hackles raised, a low whine in his throat. "You hear her too, boy?" Another scream, fainter this time. Weaker. Desperate. "Please, my babies are freezing!" Gideon grabbed his heavy coat, his rifle, and the rope from beside the door. He'd been a cavalry scout for 15 years, knew these mountains better than any man alive, and he knew what that weakness in her voice meant. Hypothermia. Exhaustion. Time running out. "Find her, Storm," Gideon commanded, throwing open the door to the white wall of blizzard. "Find her now." The dog lunged into the storm without hesitation. The wind was a living thing, trying to tear Gideon apart as he pushed through snow that was already waist deep. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the last hour. This wasn't just a snowstorm. This was a killer blizzard, the kind that buried wagon trains and froze cattle solid where they stood. Storm bounded ahead, his thick gray coat barely visible in the whiteout. The dog had the keenest nose Gideon had ever seen, could track a rabbit through a creek and a man through a forest fire. If anyone could find that woman in this hell, it was Storm. "Help us! Please!" Closer now. Gideon changed direction, following the sound and Storm's disappearing form. His face was already numb, ice forming in his beard. Didn't matter. Someone was dying up here, and Gideon Cole didn't let people die in his mountains if he could prevent it. Storm's bark cut through the wind, sharp, urgent, insistent. The "I found them" bark that Gideon had trained him into years ago. Gideon crashed through a stand of ice-laden pines and nearly fell over the wagon. It was tilted at a sick angle, one wheel completely shattered. The horse was gone, probably bolted when the wheel broke or maybe cut loose to try for help. And huddled against the leeward side of the wagon, barely visible under a thin blanket already thick with snow, were 4 people. A woman and 3 children. "Ma'am!" Gideon dropped beside them, his hands already assessing. The woman looked up at him with eyes that had nearly given up hope. She was young, maybe 30, with dark hair plastered to her face by snow and exhaustion. "My children!" she gasped through chattering teeth. "Please, my children!" Gideon looked at the kids. A girl about 10, shaking violently, a boy maybe 7, his lips blue, and a tiny thing, couldn't be more than 4, barely conscious in her mother's arms. They were all in the later stages of hypothermia. Another hour and they'd be dead. "I've got a cabin 20 minutes from here. Can you walk?" "I don't know. I can't feel my feet." "Then I'll carry you. Storm?" The dog appeared at his side. "Guard." Storm positioned himself next to the children. His bulk provided immediate windbreak and warmth. The oldest girl reached out instinctively and buried her hand in his thick fur. Gideon made a decision. The 2 older children could maybe walk if he supported them. The woman and the tiny one would have to be carried. "What's your name?" he asked the woman as he fashioned a sling from the rope. "Rebecca. Rebecca Ward. These are my children, Sarah, Daniel, and little Emma." "Well, Mrs. Ward, I'm Gideon Cole, and that's Storm. We're going to get you out of here, but I need you to hold your youngest tight. I'm going to carry you both, and the older 2 are going to walk between me and Storm. Understand?" "Yes. Thank you. Oh, God, thank you." "Thank me when we're warm. Sarah, Daniel, can you stand?" The children struggled to their feet, the boy falling once before he got his balance. They were in bad shape, but they were young and tough. They could make it if they moved now. Gideon lifted Rebecca and little Emma in one motion, settling them across his shoulders in a carry he'd learned in the cavalry. The woman weighed almost nothing. She'd been starving herself to feed her children. I'd bet money on it. "Storm, lead!" "Sarah, Daniel, you follow Storm. Stay right behind him. He'll break the wind for you. I'll be right behind you. If you fall, I'll pick you up. But we have to move fast. Understand?" "Yes, sir." "Good girl. Storm, home!" The dog turned and started back the way they'd come, his powerful body cutting a path through the deep snow. The children followed, stumbling but moving. and Gideon brought up the rear carrying a woman and child who might already be too far gone. But he'd be damned if he wasn't going to try. The cabin appeared out of the whiteness like a miracle. Rough-hewn logs, a stone chimney already pushing smoke into the storm, small windows glowing with firelight. Gideon had built it himself over the course of 2 years, each log cut and placed by his own hands. It wasn't much, but it was solid and tight and warm. Storm hit the door first and it swung open. Gideon never locked it because who the hell came up here? The children stumbled inside and Gideon carried Rebecca and Emma through behind them. The warmth hit like a physical blow. The fire he'd left burning in the stone hearth was roaring. The cabin was already warm from his morning's work. Storm shook himself violently, spraying snow everywhere, then immediately went to the children and started licking the ice from their faces. "Sarah, Daniel," Gideon said, setting Rebecca and Emma down near the fire, "get out of those wet clothes, everything off, right now. There's blankets on that bed. Wrap yourselves up tight." He turned to Rebecca. "Can you undress Emma, or do you need help?" "I can do it." Rebecca's hands were shaking so badly she could barely work the buttons, but she managed. Gideon stripped Emma's wet dress off and wrapped the little girl in the thickest blanket he owned, then did the same for Rebecca while she was too cold to protest. Within minutes, all 4 of them were wrapped in blankets and furs, huddled by the fire. Storm lay beside the children, his body heat adding to the warmth. Gideon put a kettle on for hot tea and checked their extremities. No frostbite yet. They'd gotten lucky. "How long were you out there?" he asked Rebecca. "Since yesterday morning. We were trying to reach Timber Ridge before the storm hit. The wheel broke, the horse panicked and ran. I tried to get the children to shelter under the wagon, but..." She closed her eyes. "We would have died. If you hadn't heard me, we would have died. But I did hear you, and you're alive. That's what matters." "Why are you up here?" Rebecca asked, looking around the cabin. It was sparse, but well made. A bed, a table, shelves with supplies, hunting gear on the walls, and enough firewood stacked in the corner to last a month. Nobody lives this far up the mountain. I do. Gideon poured hot tea into tin cups and brought them over. "Drink this, small sips. It'll help." Rebecca took the cup gratefully. Sarah and Daniel were already looking better. Their lips had lost the blue tinge and their shaking was subsiding. Little Emma was asleep in her mother's arms, her breathing steady. "You saved our lives," Rebecca said softly. "Storm found you. I just carried you." "You're being modest." "I'm being accurate." Gideon checked the fire, added another log. "Storm's the real hero. Best tracking dog in the territory, maybe the best I've ever seen." As if understanding the praise, Storm lifted his head and thumped his tail against the floor. Sarah giggled, the first sound of joy Gideon had heard from any of them.
"Can I pet him?" she asked. "He'd be insulted if you didn't." The girl reached out tentatively, and Storm moved closer, letting her bury her fingers in his thick fur. Daniel joined in, and soon both children were petting the massive dog, who looked absolutely content. "He's gentle with kids," Gideon explained. "Fierce as hell with wolves and cougars, but gentle as a lamb with young ones." "What breed is he?" Rebecca asked. "Mix of everything. Part wolf, part Malamute, part German shepherd, and probably part bear, knowing his attitude. Found him as a pup 6 years ago. Raised him myself. He's saved my life more times than I can count." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, watching her children warm themselves by the fire, petting the dog who'd helped save their lives. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "We were running out of time. I was starting to think..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "You don't have to think about that now. You're safe. Your children are safe. The storm will blow itself out in a day or 2, and then I'll get you down to Timber Ridge." "How far is Timber Ridge from here?" "About 8 miles. 6-hour walk in good weather. 2 days in this." Gideon looked at the window where the blizzard was still raging. "But we've got food, water, firewood, and shelter. We'll be fine." Rebecca nodded, but Gideon could see the questions in her eyes. Questions about why a man would choose to live this far from civilization. Questions about what he was running from or hiding from. Questions he had no intention of answering. "Get some rest," he said. "You're all exhausted. I'll keep the fire going and watch the storm. You're safe here." Rebecca looked at him for a long moment, then she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Cole." Gideon, just Gideon. "Thank you, Gideon." The storm raged for 2 days. During that time, Gideon learned more about Rebecca Ward than he'd learned about another human being in 6 years. She was a widow. Her husband Thomas had died 8 months ago from an injury that turned septic. She'd tried to keep their small farm going, but between the debt, the drought, and her own inability to manage everything alone, she'd lost it. Her sister lived in Timber Ridge and had offered to take them in. The wagon had been their last possession worth selling, and it had nearly cost them their lives. The children warmed to Storm immediately. Sarah spent hours brushing his fur and telling him elaborate stories. Daniel made it his job to help Gideon with chores, bringing in firewood, checking supplies, learning to keep a fire at the right temperature. And little Emma barely left Storm's side, curling up against his bulk to sleep, her small hands tangled in his fur. "They needed this," Rebecca said on the second night, watching Daniel help Gideon prepare dinner. "They've been so afraid, so uncertain about everything. But here, with you and Storm, they feel safe." "Storm has that effect on people. He's good at making folks feel protected." "I think you have that effect too, even if you don't realize it." Gideon didn't respond to that. He wasn't a man who thought much about his effect on others. He just did what needed doing. On the third morning, the storm broke. The wind died, the snow stopped, and when Gideon stepped outside, the world was buried under 3 feet of fresh powder. The sky was bright blue, the sun blinding on the white landscape. "We can travel today," he announced. "Snow's stopped, and the path down the mountain will be passable. It'll be slow going, but we can make Timber Ridge by nightfall." Rebecca looked relieved and sad at the same time. Her children, on the other hand, looked devastated. "Do we have to go? Can't we stay here with Gideon and Storm?" "We have to go to Aunt Martha's. We have to start our new life." "But I like it here." "I know, but this is Gideon's home. We're just visitors." Gideon felt something twist in his chest. He pushed it away. These people weren't his responsibility beyond getting them to safety. That's all this was, a rescue, nothing more. He spent the morning preparing for the journey, packing food, securing warm clothing for everyone, fashioning a sled from some old boards to carry little Emma when she got tired. Storm seemed to sense they were leaving and stayed close to the children, as if making the most of their last hours together. By noon, they were ready. "Stay close together," he instructed, as they set out. "The snow is deep, but the path is clear. Storm will lead, I'll bring up the rear. If anyone gets tired, we stop. No heroics. This isn't a race." The descent was slow and careful. The children did remarkably well, even little Emma, who walked for 2 hours before Gideon put her on the sled. Storm led the way with absolute confidence, his path cutting through the deep snow like he'd done it 1,000 times, which he probably had. They stopped once for food and water, eating dried meat and bread from Gideon's stores while sitting on a fallen log overlooking the valley below. Timber Ridge was visible in the distance, smoke rising from chimneys, civilization waiting to reclaim them. "There it is," Rebecca said softly, "our new home. Will Aunt Martha live there?" "Yes, she has a boarding house. We'll help her run it." "Will we have our own room?" "We'll share one, but yes, our own space." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, "Will we ever see Gideon and Storm again?" Rebecca glanced at Gideon, who was carefully not making eye contact. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe." They finished eating and continued down the mountain. By late afternoon, they reached the outskirts of Timber Ridge. The town was small but bustling, maybe 200 people, with a main street, shops, a church, and several boarding houses. Gideon led them to the largest boarding house, a white 2-story building with a sign that read, "Martha's Rest." A woman came out onto the porch, 50s, stout, with kind eyes that lit up when she saw Rebecca. "Rebecca! Oh, thank God! We heard about the storm and feared the worst." The sisters embraced, and Martha swept the children into her arms, exclaiming over how cold they were and how they needed food and warmth immediately. In the chaos of the reunion, Gideon stepped back. His job was done. The family was safe. Time to go. He turned to leave, but Rebecca's voice stopped him. "Gideon, wait!" He turned back. She was standing on the porch, her children around her, her sister watching with curious eyes. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved our lives, all of us. We owe you everything." "You don't owe me anything. I did what anyone would do." "No," Rebecca said firmly. "You did what a good man does, a brave man, a man of honor." She paused. "If you ever need anything at all, you know where to find us. This door is always open to you." Gideon nodded once. "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Ward. Take care of your children." "We will, thanks to you." He turned to leave, Storm at his side, but Sarah broke away from her mother and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Thank you for saving us. Thank you for being brave."
Gideon awkwardly patted her head. "You be good for your mother, understand? Help your aunt. Take care of your brother and sister." "I will, I promise." Daniel came next, shaking Gideon's hand with all the seriousness a 7-year-old could muster. "You're a hero, Mr. Cole, a real hero." And finally, little Emma toddled over and buried her face in Storm's fur one last time. The big dog lowered his head and gently licked her cheek, making her giggle. "Bye, Storm," she whispered. "I love you." Storm's tail wagged once, twice. Then Gideon and Storm turned and walked away, leaving the family on the porch of Martha's Rest, safe and warm and alive. The cabin felt different when Gideon returned to it 3 days later. It was the same structure, same logs, same fire, same furniture, but somehow it felt emptier, quieter. The silence that Gideon had once craved now felt heavy. Storm seemed to feel it too. The dog kept going to the spot where Sarah had brushed him, where Daniel had practiced knots, where Emma had slept against his side, looking for children who weren't there. "They're gone, boy," I said. "Back to their lives, back where they belong." Storm whined softly. Gideon went back to his routine, checking traps, hunting, chopping wood, maintaining the cabin. The work kept his hands busy, kept his mind occupied, but it didn't fill the strange emptiness that had settled into his home. 2 weeks later, Storm started barking at the door. Gideon grabbed his rifle, expecting a wolf or maybe a bear drawn by the smell of fresh meat, but when he opened the door, he found something else entirely. Rebecca Ward, standing in his yard with a pack on her back and determination in her eyes. "Mrs. Ward, what are you doing here? I came to see if you needed any help." "Help with what?" "Whatever you need help with. Cooking, cleaning, managing supplies, company." She met his eyes. "You saved my life, Gideon Cole. Saved my children's lives. And I've spent the last 2 weeks at my sister's boarding house realizing something." "What's that?" "That you're up here alone. That you don't have to be. That maybe you could use someone to talk to, someone to share a meal with, someone to remind you that the world isn't always cruel." She paused. "And if I'm wrong, I'll turn around and walk back down this mountain and never bother you again."
Gideon stared at her, at this woman who'd nearly frozen to death in his mountains, who had every reason to stay safe in town with her sister and her children, but who'd walked 8 miles through snow to stand in his yard and offer him company. Storm made the decision for him. The dog bounded over to Rebecca, tail wagging furiously, and leaned against her legs. "Traitor," I muttered to the dog. Then to Rebecca, "Your children?" "Safe with my sister. I'll visit them every week. They're thriving." She smiled. "Daniel wants to be a mountain man when he grows up, and Emma made me promise to give Storm a hug from her." "You walked 8 miles to give my dog a hug?" "I walked 8 miles to see if a good man wanted some company. The hug is a bonus." Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he stepped aside from the door. "Coffee's hot, and I was about to make dinner. You can stay for that at least. Then we'll see." Rebecca smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine, and walked into the cabin. Storm followed her, tail still wagging, and Gideon Cole, who'd built his life in isolation, discovered that maybe, just maybe, some company wasn't such a terrible thing after all. If you enjoyed this story of courage and survival in the wilderness, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced the kindness of a stranger in your darkest moment? Share your stories, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of heroism, loyalty, and the bonds that form when people face impossible odds together. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.